Welcome everybody. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jennifer Brancato and I will be your host tonight. Some quick housekeeping for those of you who have not used Zoom. You can access the comment box and Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We will have time for questions at the end, but feel free to ask those questions as we go. Jana Hill, our Adult Services Manager, is in the background. She'll help me monitor those so I don't miss any. So before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I've been an archivist here at the Fort Worth Public Library for about 2.5 years, but I've been working in the field for over a decade. Previously, I worked in archives at universities in East Texas and then Ohio. I realized it was time for me to get back home to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, so I took the position here. My degrees are in history and public history. I'm a certified archivist as well as a digital archive specialist. So let's get into it. So why personal digital archiving? Why did I want to do this program? Well, I think it's really important. And I like to use the shoebox metaphor to explain why. So we all have a shoebox or another kind of box lying around our house or in storage full of documents and photographs. And for the most part, you can leave that box alone in a good environment and someone can find that box in 10, 20, 100 years and they'll still be able to look at those documents and pictures. But that just isn't the case with digital materials. Digital materials need both software and hardware to be accessed. So it's important to understand that these materials need special treatment. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So thinking and planning ahead is vital in preserving your digital records. Will you be able to find that document you need 5 years down the road? Once you find it, will you be able to open it and use it? So thinking long-term is extremely important. I know that can be difficult when it comes to anything related to technology, but we really do have to try. So how do you make your files last? It's really by taking these steps, and I will go over each of these steps this evening. So step 1, locate your files. If you're anything like me, you have files all over the place. They're on your computer, they're on your laptop, an external hard drive. I don't know how many USBs I have floating around. They're on cloud services or a cell phone. They're everywhere. So the first thing that you should do is do an inventory and figure out where everything is. Step 2, decide what you want to keep and for how long to keep it. Here's a sampling of items that you might need to keep. Questions that you can ask yourself are, might I need this for a claim down the road? Is there a legal, financial, tax reason why I need to preserve this record? Or does it have historical value that makes me want to keep it indefinitely? I understand there's a lot of varies on that how long column, and that's because it really does vary. That decision is based on a number of things, and it can range from as short as 3 months for things like receipts to wanting to keep things permanently for things like marriage license or photographs or your videos or your genealogy research. So how long you keep something is very dependent on the situation and the person. You can speak with a lawyer or a financial advisor and they would have suggestions on how long to keep things. And there are also a lot of websites out there that can help. If you go and just do a search for something like records retention for individuals, you'll get many websites that have lots of good tips on how long to keep records. So step 3, now you know where you're keeping. And now you have to decide what file format you will want to use. So we try to think of what will be accessible in 5, 10, or even 20 years. And like I said, these decisions are hard because of how quickly technology changes. However, the file formats listed on this screen are pretty stable. And by that, I mean they're widely used. So there are a lot of documentation and a lot of standards out there surrounding them. So I would consider them pretty safe to use. Now, not all of these are considered preservation formats by Archivist standards, but they are really good for personal use. And if you want to know what an archivist considers a preservation format, here are 3 sites that list those formats, and I'll actually put them in the chat at the end of the session so you can get to them easy. Many of the formats on this slide are actually considered acceptable or secondary formats that these institutions will allow and accept. So that's why I like to use them for personal. Many of our preservation formats create really large files. There was this one time at one of the universities I worked for, we were scanning a map. It was a very, very large map. We scanned it in the TIFF file format, which is the preservation format, and it created a gigantic file. It was so big that my computer did not want to open it. When it finally opened, I couldn't even do anything with the file. So while TIFF is preservation, it's just sometimes really difficult to work with if it's too large. Now, some notes about the image files, because everybody likes to know about storing images. JPEG is what we consider a lossy file type, meaning that you lose a tiny, tiny amount of data every time you use that file. TIFFs are lossless, meaning you don't lose any data. And like I said, they're the preservation format, but they can take up a lot of storage space that as individuals just might not have access to. So again, for personal use, JPEGs will work. Step 4, organize and describe. So this is probably the most time-consuming step, but it's really important. What is the metadata? Metadata is data about data. Basically, it's anything that gives you more information about the file that you're looking at. And metadata is so important because it not only helps you find what you're looking for, but it also tells others what they're looking at. So there are a few different types of metadatas, but the 2 that I think are important for you to know about are descriptive and technical. Descriptive metadata helps in the discovery and identification of files. So it'll include things like titles, captions, descriptions, who created the file, things like that. Technical metadata helps in rendering of files. And it includes things like file format, which helps decide what software is needed to read the files. It includes file size, DPI, dimensions, so things like that. And metadata can be recorded in 2 different ways. It can be recorded outside of the file or live outside of the file, or it can be embedded in the file. Here's an example of metadata that lives outside of the file. In this case, I used a spreadsheet containing very basic metadata. You can see that I have the file in which the file lives, the file folder in which the file lives, the file name, a short description of that file, and then the type or file format of the file. Now, when using this method, you want to make sure you include the file name, or you won't be able to match up the description with the correct file. So you can pick any kind of metadata that you want to include in this file, but make sure you have the file name. And remember, save it in a file, save the file in one of the formats that I discussed previously. So in this case, it was an Excel sheet, but I would want to save the final copy as a CSV file, which is a comma separated value file. And then you have embedded metadata. And this is the type of metadata that lives within the file. The technical metadata is automatically created for you, but you'll have to add descriptive metadata. Now, I do caution people about embedded metadata, that it does not always travel between different software and services. So you want to be cautious when using embedded metadata, but it's still really useful and helpful and important to use. Just know that it doesn't always travel with the file like we would expect. There are groups trying to make a standardized way for embedded metadata not to be stripped away, but right now that's just not the case. So there are a lot of people that use metadata, and if you embedded metadata like this, and you can add it a couple of different ways. You can add it to individual files through your basic operating system or in software like Adobe Photoshop. But you can also do it in batches, so to a large number of files in programs like Adobe Bridge or Adobe Lightroom, or a lot of other metadata editors that are out there. There's just a ton of them. Some will require you to purchase the software, but there are some free open source software available as well. So I want to show you that it's super easy to add embedded metadata. In Windows, you just right click on the file, select property. You click right here on, and I'm not sure if you can see, but right here on the details. And then you can just type in anything that you want under these fields. Now, things like dimension, DPI, like I said, those are already created for you. But the main thing you'll want to add are titles, subjects or tags, and then comments. This is how you would do it in Photoshop. It's almost exactly the same, just a few different clicks, but you open the file, click File menu, select File Info, and then edit or enter the metadata and click OK. Now, I don't really have a slide for batch changes because the way that you do batch changes is really going to be different depending on the program that you use. But when you decide on a metadata editor, the first place I would look for batch operations would be under Tools or Properties, and then look for something that's like batch editing or batch metadata, but there'll be batch operations somewhere because it's going to be available in most metadata editors. So now we're going to talk about organizing. A good directory structure and standardized file naming is extremely helpful in preserving and passing along your files. Not only do they help keep you organized, but it can also help with descriptive metadata. And I'll show you here in a minute what I mean by that. But the first thing is use a consistent date format. So I use year, month, day, and 4-month year, 2-month day, or 4-digit year, 2-digit month, and 2-digit day, and that'll keep your files in chronological order. I know that's not really how we as Americans do our dates, but it really does keep things in order. Use descriptive names, but keep it short. Limit file names to about 32 characters, but actually try for less. Long names can cause problems. I had an instance at the university I worked at in Ohio. They were transferring files from a department to the archives, and there was probably about 500 files that I was dealing with, and I was only able to transfer about 95%, which is actually pretty good, but the other 5% I could not transfer because the names were like 2 sentences long. And the computer, every time I would try to open them or download them or change the file name, it would be like, nope, not happening. Your file name is too long. So be careful on how long you name your file names. Limit the use of abbreviations, but if you do use them, define them in a README text file that lives in the same folder as the rest of the files. And that is so people know what those abbreviations are. Use leading zeros to keep things in a sequential order. So instead of 1, 2, and 3, use 001, 002, 003. Some systems will put 1, 10, 11, and 12 together instead of 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you use leading zeros, it'll keep them in order. Avoid special characters and don't use spaces. Underscores or hyphens are good and make up for the spaces. So I'm actually going to show you an example with my own material. So hopefully you can all see this now. So this is my Amazon Drive account. And you can see I have it really basically set up as you would on your computer or laptop. I'm going to show you a couple of different things, how I use my file naming and structure to organize. So I'll start with family research because I'm sure we have a few genealogists on this Zoom call. So I start by breaking it down into different sides of my family. So Brancato would be my dad's side and Eiler is my mom's side. I then go and break it down into documents and photographs. These photographs are photographs that I have come across in my research, not photographs from family or ones I've taken myself. So like here are images that I downloaded from Ancestry of different images of my aunts and my uncle and my mom from the yearbook. So those are what I put in the photos. Under document, I then break it up again into surnames. And then personally, I like to start with the date of my item, the person's name that it's related to, and then what it is that I'm looking at. So you can really do whatever you would like and organize them in a way that you like, but I like seeing things in chronological order. So I always start with the year. And you can go into any of these and see the same thing. So 1880, John Eiler is my great grandfather, and this is this census from 1880, and it just goes like that. So that's how I organize mine. And then I'll also show you some photographs, how I organize my pictures. And I normally do this by years. And like I said, you can do it a different way, but I find years to be very useful for me. And then I break it down by topic. So this right here is my brother's wedding that took place in June of 2005. And I have also that in the title of the file. So the rehearsal dinner, the wedding, and then here is my README file. And it gives information about those images, where they got married, the date they got married, who took the photographs, and then all of the files associated with that description. And I'll show you one more. It's almost exactly the same, but field school, my minor was archaeology. So I did a field school in the summer of 2005. So you see here, these actual numbers came from the computer. I did not change them, but when I imported them from my digital camera at the time, I just added field school to the front. And then the same thing with the README text. And as you see, I actually use my full name. I don't type I because you never know who's going to be reading these eventually, but the who, what, where, and when of these photographs as well. So that's how I organize, and a few examples of how you can do it. But like I said, this is very, you can change it. Sorry, you can change it to fit your needs. And I'm trying to get back to my, there we go. So step 5, make copies. Natural disasters are a genuine threat. We have floods, fires, tornadoes, and those can all do damage to your digital material at your house. As are corrupted files. And who hasn't had that? I'm having problems. I'm so sorry. It does not want to forward. Let's try this again. Okay. Sorry about that. So corrupted files are an issue too. Who hasn't had this happen to where they try and open a document and it just won't open? So how do you prevent that from happening? So we have something in the archives field that we call LOCKS, and that stands for lots of copies keep stuff safe. And I think of a 3-2-1 backup plan that's good for individuals. You have 3 copies of the file. You have the original plus 2 copies. You then have it on 2 different formats. So in this case, in the cartoon, it has an external drive as well as on the cloud. And then you store one off-site. Now this could be you store the external hard drive in a different location that's not in your home, or a cloud is automatically off-site. If you decide to do it on a hard drive, make sure that it's far away. I mean, you don't want it with your neighbor, because if a tornado destroys your house and theirs, or there's a fire that affects both of you, then both copies can be damaged. So if you want to keep it at someone's house, keep it far away. So there are 3 main ways that you can store your files other than on your personal computer. The first is actually a personal server. This is hardware and software that provide network service and centralized access to data. Pros, you can really control your privacy and security. You can access files remotely and everything is centralized. Cons, it can cost a lot of money up front. Plus, you have to have a decent amount of technical knowledge to manage the software, the security, and to manage just the maintenance of the whole thing. So you do need some technical skills to do that. Second is external storage. This is where your data is stored outside of your computer or your laptop. Pros, it's basically unlimited storage because you can buy as many as you need, and the cost is constantly getting cheaper and cheaper. Also, they're pretty secure as long as you don't lose them, which brings me to con. They're easy to lose, they're easy to damage. I don't know how many times I have washed and dried a USB. I don't know if you can tell, but I have a love-hate relationship with USBs. And also I didn't put this on the con list, but it's something that I've noticed. I bought a new laptop, I'd say within the last year, and it only has 1 USB port. So that's really frustrating. So that is another thing to consider. You know, I can't have multiple drives hooked up to my laptop if I wanted to. So now the third is cloud storage. This is when data is stored and managed on servers that belong to someone else. And I actually am going to let a video from CNBC, give you a little bit more information about how that works, as well as pros and cons of that. Oh. So I'm hearing that no audio, no good. Hold on.
Phone to the cloud. My files are sent to servers in Apple's data centers all around the world. I can access those servers by connecting to the internet.
Okay, sorry about that. Let's start over.
Have you ever taken a minute to gaze up at the clouds? You might see a dog, a dinosaur, or your data. Okay, your data isn't actually stored in a cloud in the sky, but it's easy to think so when there's so much talk about cloud computing. So how does the cloud work? The cloud is a global network of servers around the world acting as one massive hard drive. Every time you sign into your Gmail account, watch a show on Netflix, or open a file from Dropbox, you're using the cloud. Before the cloud, you might have backed up your documents, photos, or music to an external device like a CD-ROM or your computer's hard drive. Now you can back up all of that information to the cloud. When I back up my iPhone to the cloud, my files are sent to servers in Apple's data centers all around the world. I can access those servers by connecting to the internet. So even if I lose or break my phone, not that it's ever happened before, that data isn't lost forever. There are a few obvious benefits to consumers from the cloud, besides giving you peace of mind if you lose your phone. You can access your data anytime, anywhere if you're connected to the internet. And you don't have to worry about using up all of your storage on your hard drive, meaning you might not have to pay as much for a device that comes with a ton of storage. Businesses are also benefiting big time from cloud computing. It's estimated worldwide revenue from the cloud will exceed $200 billion in 2019. That's up from $145 billion just 2 years ago. You've probably heard of the two biggest names in the market, Amazon Web Services, known as AWS, and Microsoft Azure. IBM, Google, and Alibaba are also big players when it comes to providing cloud services. It's not just big tech moving business into the cloud. Smaller companies are buying in too as a way to grow their businesses. Just think, instead of having to buy all of this hardware to back up your data, you can store an unlimited amount of information online. Many cloud services are based on a subscription pricing model. That means customers pay, for example, a monthly fee for cloud services, and they can scale up or down as needed. And cloud providers are cashing in. AWS accounts for roughly 12% of Amazon's quarterly sales, but it generates more than half of the company's operating income. Before we get too excited about the cloud, let's take a step back and look at some of the risks. One obvious concern: if all of our data is online, what happens when the internet goes down? That's what happened in 2013 when an AWS outage took down Instagram, Vine, and Airbnb. Cyber attacks are another big risk, with research showing around 1/5 of all files in the cloud contain sensitive data. Finally, it can be tough for consumers and businesses to switch between different cloud companies. I might have a hard time syncing my iCloud and Google Drive accounts. That can give some big companies that are already making big money on the cloud a lot of power over our data. Hey everyone, it's Elizabeth. Thanks so much for watching. Let us know if you had.
So she actually does a really good job of explaining the pros and cons. But there is actually one thing that are a couple of things that she left out that are cons that I would like to point out. So some storage places put a restriction on the type of file you can upload and the size of the file that you can upload. Now, most places have gone away from the file type restriction, but the size restriction still does exist with a lot of companies. So you'll want to look at that if you decide to go with cloud storage. And then another, she talks about syncing between companies, but she doesn't talk about how services and companies are not permanent. So you have to consider how easy it is to get your data if the service is discontinued. Another thing that I'd like to point out quickly is that there is a difference between cloud storage and cloud backup. Cloud backup is a mirror of the device. So if you delete something off of your computer and you use a cloud backup service like Carbonite, it will delete that file from the cloud as well. And cloud storage is just that. It stores whatever you put on it, and it'll stay there until you delete it from the cloud. So depending on what you think works best for you, make sure that you're getting what you're wanting. So here are a listing of the six really popular cloud storage options. They all have their pros and cons, and this is by no means an extensive list, but it is the more popular ones. Most cloud storage services now have apps for your phone, so it'll automatically upload anything from your cell phone that you want it to. I absolutely love that, and I tell everybody to do it. Back up your phone, because basically your phone is your camera nowadays. So do that. But I also wanted to point out that if you're a Prime user, because a lot of Prime users don't know about this option, that you can get unlimited photo storage on top of the 5 gigabytes of other file storage types. But you also have to remember that if you decide to cancel your membership, your unlimited storage goes away. So make sure you download all your content before canceling. So all of these have some sort of free tier, and then you pay monthly or yearly depending on how much storage you want. And these are all accurate prices as of earlier this week. So it's relatively cheap for the amount of storage that you get. But like I said, there are pros and cons for each. And I recommend looking at all of those before making a decision if you decide to go with cloud storage. So step 5, managing those files that you've worked so hard to organize and describe. So I recommend that you open your files at least once a year. You don't have to open every single one, but you want to open a good amount. You want to make sure you're logging onto your cloud storage periodically and checking those files as well. Your external storage devices, you want to replace those every 5 years. You still want to check the files on them every year, but replace the devices every 5 years. Even if they're still working, I recommend a good replacement because they fail. And we really don't have a good idea of how long those storage devices last. And then migrate to new formats as recommended or needed. So if you notice that a file format that you've been using is not really popular anymore, you'll want to start migrating those files to the new format that is. So last step, passing your files on to other people. So I suggest you create a document that outlines where your most important documents are, where all of your other files are stored, as well as passwords for clouds, locked files, your social media accounts. Now for the passwords, I recommend using a password keeper. We change our passwords so often that if you had all your passwords written down and saved, you would have to constantly be updating it, right? So with a password keeper, you only have to maintain one password. I use a password keeper. I have my main password has been given to trusted individuals. So if something happens to me, they can have access to all my accounts with that single password. And then you'll want to print and keep this document with your important records. Many times people are now adding this type of information into their wills. So it's something that you might want to consider. So I've actually covered all of these steps, but before we finish, I want to discuss how you can control your data within certain popular services that most of us use. And I'll start with the most popular cloud services. So Google is the most robust that I have found. You can download all of your data just by requesting it. And then they also have something they call an inactive account manager. And that is where you can allow up to 10 people to access your account after it's been inactive for an amount of time that you set. These 10 people, you can also be very specific on what they have access to. So your spouse or your partner, say you give them access to everything in the account, but you give your siblings only access to the drive where you keep your research or your photographs. So you can be very selective on what those 10 people have access to. Amazon has nothing in place to let you pre-designate someone. Currently, their standard policy is that you must be able to access the account with a password, or the executor of the deceased person would need to contact support in order to be given instructions on how to submit relevant documentation. Now, I hunted everywhere on Amazon for their policy and I was not able to find it. I actually had to email them and ask them about that. And they were never clear on if they would give someone access to the content after they passed. They just said you would have to submit instructions on, or you would be given instructions on submitting the proper documentation. So Amazon was still a little unclear. Apple, they also do not let you pre-designate anybody to inherit your digital data. They work on a case-by-case basis and can be very strict. There are a couple scenarios that that come up with Apple, like if you want to remotely wipe a device like an iPhone or an iPad so it can be used by someone else, you'll likely need a death certificate and a document naming you as the executor. If a deceased stored data only on the device and that device is running an ISO 8.0 or later with a passcode, which most are, I can't imagine that there's any Apple devices running lower than that. It's encrypted in such a way that even Apple can't access that data. And if you want to access the content that's backed up in the iCloud, like photos or documents, you normally need a court order to do so. So Apple is very, very strict. So with social media, Facebook, you can download all your data and save it in files and then treat it as a file like we've been discussing all night. You can also transfer copies of your photos and videos to a few different other services, and Google is one of those. These right here, so to download your data or transfer copies, you just go to settings and your Facebook information and you'll see how to do that. They also have something called a legacy contact. Now it has to be someone with a Facebook account, but to set this up, you go to settings, general settings, and then memorialization settings. And the person you designate will be able to manage tribute posts on your profiles, and they can decide who can post, who can see post, they can delete posts, and they can remove tags. They can also request the removal of your account. They can respond to new friend requests. They can update your profile and cover photo. But they can only manage posts that were made after you've passed away, and they won't be able to see any of your direct messages. You can also choose to either allow them to download a copy of what you've shared on Facebook or not allow them to. Now, if you allow them to, they'll be able to download posts, photos, videos, information from your About section, but they won't be able to do anything with your messages. So with Instagram, you can also request a copy of your photos, comments, and profile information by going to settings and then download. They don't really have anything like legacy contact like Facebook does, but someone can request an account to be memorialized. And this link right here is the process on how to do that. So with Twitter, you can also download all your data by going to settings and then your account. If you die, no one has a legal way to access your account. They would need your password. And you can ask Twitter to remove someone's account via that form for the link on there, but they will not give you access to the account or a copy of the data on that account. All they'll do is delete the account. And so 2 last things, and they are not easy to preserve, and that's emails and text messages. All email programs have an archive feature, but what all that really does is archive emails in a place where you don't see them anymore, but you can still find them if you need to. And that's fine as long as you continue to use the same program. There are ways to export emails into files like a PST file, EML file, or an inbox file that you might be able to upload into another email program, but you might not. So those are kind of iffy. And as of right now, you'll always need an email program to read emails no matter what. So I actually still suggest that you save the most important emails as PDFs and treat them like other files that you are preserving. Now, these are the important ones, not all of them. And then download all the attachments that you want to keep and treat them as files that you wish to preserve. For text messages, there are apps out there that allow you to back up your text messages. So I have an app that backs up all my texts weekly, along with their attachments. And then it uploads a proprietary file to my Google account. If I lose or upgrade my phone, I can then download that same app onto my new phone and get that backup file. But that backup file is only useful with the same app. I actually have text messages and their attachments that go back to 2013 on my phone, even though I've changed phones a number of times throughout the years. Now, like I mentioned, there are concerns like that backup file can only be read by that app. And so if that app stops working, and I decide to change my phone, or I lost my phone and the app's no longer available, then I've lost my text messages. So what I do is I download all these wonderful pictures that my brother sends me of my niece, or pictures that my sister sends me of her and her boyfriend and all that. I download all those photos, I save those, and then treat them like I would all of my other files. But text messaging and emails are still really hard to preserve. So I think I'm finished. Thank you for listening to me. I will hope that you are able to fill out the survey. I'll put it in the text box so you can access that. And if you are participating in the Beanstack Challenge, PDA 21 is what you will put in there to get credit. So,
all right, Jennifer, this is Jana. We have some questions.
All right, great.
And I'm just going to read them off for you.
Okay.
Okay. So first, when you showed your shoebox at the beginning,
yes,
what's a good environment to store that shoebox in?
So you want low humidity and in a dark place. The temperature is important, but really a low temperature, but it's best for a low humidity. Now in Texas, and when I was in East Texas, it was even worse and hard to keep your humidity, but those are the best environment. Low temp, low humidity, dark environments are the best for photographs and documents.
Okay. How do you avoid losing data when you repeatedly save a JPEG?
there is no way. It is a lossy file and it just happens. But it's such a small amount that there's just really, you will never know that you're losing data. It's just so small.
Does opening a JPEG lose data?
I think it's mainly saving that causes it to lose data. But like I said, it's such a small amount. Sometimes I don't even think, sometimes I think I should leave that part out because it's such a small amount that it doesn't affect the file. But I feel like I need to, at least point that out to people. But it's such, I save all my personal files as JPEGs.
Okay. So speaking of all of your personal files, when you showed your when you showed your README file with all the file names in it, did you just copy and paste the file names, or did you use some other tool to come up with that list?
I actually used a command line option to get those file names, or because that's just the easiest way for me to do it. But if you want step-by-step instructions on how I did that, I can definitely show you. Shoot me an email. It's not as easy as just copying and pasting, but there are also a couple of freeware programs that I can share with you to where you can run this program and it will download all the file names as well as the file size and file types. It'll give you all this technical metadata that you can then put into your README file. So if you're interested in any of that, just shoot me an email and I'll be glad to share those programs with you.
Okay. Is it important to save the assigned number on a photo, even if you've added the names and dates in the metadata?
What do you mean by assigned photo?
I think the person meant, when you download photos off your phone or your camera, they have a number that the device assigns it.
So back in the day on those really, really old ones, no, I did not save those numbers because for the most part, they didn't have any, like I couldn't figure out what the relevant information was or if they told me anything. But currently your cell phone, when you download images from your cell phone, those are the date and time that you took that photo. So if you don't feel like adding it to an external metadata or even, it should already be embedded, but sometimes, like I said, they get stripped. You can leave those on and it'll give you the date and the time that you took the photo. So currently it does have good information, but if you have that information elsewhere, then you don't necessarily need to keep it in your file name.
Okay. Are there easy ways, easy is probably the operative word here. Are there easy ways to save text message streams from a phone rather than copying and pasting each message at a time?
You can always screenshot important text messages. And then it would be like a JPEG file, I believe, are what most phones create when you do screenshots. But no, there really isn't. Text messages, like I said, text messages and emails, even in the archive world, we're still figuring it out on how to best preserve those. So if you're interested in saving the actual text of an email, a screenshot is probably a good way to do it. But then the attachments in a text message, a screenshot would be the best way. But those attachments you can download and save as a separate file.
Okay, and knowing what you know, which is a lot, what would you say would be the top 1 or 2 things that our attendees should go home and do that would make the biggest impact in their collections of digital stuff?
Well, first I would find them, and then I would make copies of them. So I actually currently have all of my data in 4 different places. I know that that lovely comic has 3, but I have it in 4. I have it on my laptop. I have it in 2 clouds. Okay, so I should take that back. I have my documents in 3 different places and my photographs in 4. So my documents are on my computer on 2 different cloud services, and then my photographs are on my computer, 2 different cloud services, and then on Flickr, so my family can access and download publicly because it's a public website, so they can access those at any given time. So those would be, so locate files and make copies of those files. And then third, organize those files. Even if you're just putting them into file folders that have a description of what they are, like I showed you, and you can't get around to the README files, that's fine. But those would be the ones that I would do. Oh, and I also said that I would put these in here as well. So you can see what archivists consider to be preservation copies or preservation formats. And I actually think I was able to get it. So here I just put the survey into my chat box. So we would love to hear from you. What I didn't discuss, what you would like to hear more of, what other programs you would like to see. All right, so if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and end the session. And thank you again for joining. I'm glad you could make it. And feel free to email me, call me, and I will be happy to answer any other questions. Thanks, everybody.